Coming up next, the Bookening reads Willa Cather's My Antonia. Welcome to the Bookening. Welcome to episode 55. Can you guys believe that we're 55 episodes into the Bookening?
No.
Feels like just yesterday we were in that little room together.
Yep.
Recording.
Just like yesterday.
Episode 1. And now here we are. We're in the beautiful Warhorn Studios. We're sitting on gold thrones. Fabergé eggs are being juggled by our jester right now. Anyway, my name is Nathan Alverson. I am a poor wayfaring stranger upon this round globe of misery we call the world. And I'm joined by two other weary travelers. First one of them, well, he's a regular son of a sea biscuit, Brandon Chastain.
Son of a sea biscuit?
Son of a sea biscuit.
Okay.
How you doing there, Brandon?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I guess I should provide some context. Some of my context for today is that I had an endoscopy this morning, Brandon.
What's an endoscopy, Nathan?
That's where they put you on Twilight drugs.
Oh, I thought you meant like the vampire stuff.
Yeah. Like a sparkling vampire comes out, drinks your blood.
I went to pick Nathan up because he's not allowed to drive, and he's like, man, I really love Twilight. What's wrong with you?
Did you get that on tape? Blackmail.
If only.
Man, I really loved it. No, I love the drug Twilight. It was quite impressive. It was like being Incepted or something. Incepted with good health. What I remember is they wheeled me into the thing, and I was like, oh no, I'm in a docked operating room. And then they were like, we're going to turn on the medicine now. It'll take you a little while to fall asleep. And I was like, okay, doctor. Cut to, I'm in the recovery room. But the weird thing about it is that there was absolutely no feeling of the passage of time. Like, I've never had this in my life. Like, generally when you sleep, you
are aware that you've slept.
You're aware that you've slept. You feel the passage of time.
Yeah.
But this was great. I mean, it was literally like, in my mind, the way that it happened was there was no change, and I don't really even remember being drugged up. I'm told that I asked many of the same questions over and over again in the recovery room, but I have no memory.
Your mom also told me that.
Yes. Well, I'm told by my mom is what I mean, but I only remember asking them once. I asked them until I knew the answer, I guess. So that's how my day's been. I don't remember why I'm telling that story. And you're a son of a sea biscuit.
Great.
That's why we decided to go with that metaphor.
I take it. Have you seen Dunkirk yet?
I have not. Have you seen Dunkirk?
No. Your Incepted
yes
thing made me think of that.
That is by Christopher Nolan, the great Christopher Nolan. He likes to incept our brains with quality cinema.
That's right.
Do I stand by that? Yeah, I like Christopher Nolan. There's nothing wrong with Christopher Nolan. Brandon, you, I understand, had the great pleasure of a trip to Holiday World today.
I did. Yeah, rode the Voyage.
Rode the Voyage.
Most intense wooden roller coaster I've ever been on in my life.
In the roller coaster ride that has been the beginning of this episode, have we reached the pinnacle where I say your name and title yet?
What happens after that? Is that like this steep drop down? Voyage is the best wooden roller coaster I've ever been on.
Wow.
I've been on a lot of wooden roller coasters, so there.
You heard it from Brandon. He's the scholar who's a baller of
roller coasters.
Reviewing wooden roller coasters.
This is our new segment.
Our new segment.
I'd be fine with that.
We could put it behind the paywall. Maybe you and the Phantom could do that.
Yeah, there we go. Finally have an idea. I was so looking forward to getting that nailed down.
Yeah, I know you've been waiting for a great... Anyway, we just hit the pinnacle of Brandon's... Day. And now we go into the depths. We travel to the depths of introducing Jake Menzel, the pastor who's a master of reading. How are you doing, Jake?
I'm all right.
What's the most exciting thing that happened in your day?
Today...
I got an endoscopy.
You got an endoscopy.
Brendan Brendan. I just called you Brendan.
Like Brendan Fraser.
Brendan
Fraser probably drunkenly wondered what happened to his career. And sorry, Brendan Fraser. But I liked you. You shouldn't have done whatever you did that made people stop hiring in movies. I liked George of the Jungle. I liked you in Mummy Parts 1 and 2. Never saw Part 3. I'm sure it was fine or whatever. Did see Rachel Weisz accept an Academy Award, and the announcer said, accepting her first Academy Award is Rachel Weisz, who has starred in such films as The Mummy. And I'm sure she felt great about that at the Academy Awards. But,
you were fine in Crash.
Was he fine in Crash?
He was in Crash.
I never saw Crash.
I forgot.
I don't watch movies about people discovering things about themselves, generally speaking.
That's what books are for.
That's what books are for.
Yeah.
Jake, you got an endoscopy over here in my chair. You got a roller coaster.
I did not get an endoscopy.
Oh, no, you didn't. I wasn't saying that you in my chair got an endoscopy. I'm saying in my chair is a man that got an endoscopy. Over in Brandon's chair, there's a man that took his family. They rode some wild roller coasters. What did you do to compete with those fine experiences today, sir?
Today is my half birthday.
Today's your half birthday. Wow.
It is also the 6th birthday of my son.
The 6th birthday of your son. How old is he?
My third born. He's 6, Nathan, because it was his 6th birthday.
Oh boy!
And you could be counting his 0th birthday as his first birthday, like they do in China or wherever. Don't they do that somewhere?
Yes, I think so.
So what did you do? Did you celebrate this son's birthday?
We went.
Are we allowed to say the name of this son on
Ian.
the Bookening?
It's Ian.
That Malaysia can know about his name. What did you do with...
We actually do have real fans in Malaysia, by the way. Shout out to you guys.
Yeah, it's like the second most listeners, I think, after the United States.
Wow. Yeah, and we thought that those were bots or something like that, but Joseph, super tech guru, genius guy, looked into it and is convinced that we have a solid following in Malaysia. So shout out to you guys.
Hey,
Send us something on Facebook or Twitter, or shoot us an email or something. We'd love to connect with you guys.
Send us like a priceless
jewel.
Yeah, send us a priceless jewel, like a dragon jewel, or I don't know anything about Malaysia.
I think it's only like 1% of our listenership, but it's significant enough.
1% of our listeners. That's like a million people, right, Jake?
That's right. Exactly. Yeah.
That's like the whole country of Malaysia. So
while we're doing that. Also, shout out to Georgia for having the second most listeners of any state.
Hey, Georgia.
Hey, Georgia.
We have no idea why we have so many Bookening fans in Georgia, but we love you guys.
You know why?
What's up?
Because Georgia is full of Georgia peaches, and what would a Georgia peach love?
Something as sweet and awesome as us.
Something as sweet as awesome. Fun fact, Jake's so sweet, he melts in the rain.
Oh.
He brought me popsicles today after my endoscopy, Brandon.
Oh, yeah, he did.
Patriotic, possibly. He's also a patriot. He loves our country.
That's right.
They were tasty.
Yeah, I shared them with you guys.
Yeah.
And I think on the next episode just to give people a little teaser, we might read the jokes from our popsicle sticks.
Ooh.
You guys excited about that?
Tune in next time.
Yeah.
All right, so look forward to that. All right, guys. Any more thoughts about roller coasters before we go into the roller coaster of emotion and nostalgia and memory and Americana that is Willa Cather's My Antonia?
No.
All right. Oh, Brandon, let's do some shout outs to our fine fans. We got shout out to John. Shout out to Beth. Shout out to Eric and Catherine, the Lovebirds.
Eric and Catherine, the Lovebirds.
Mysterious shout out to Mr. X.
Mr. X.
All right, I love it. Thank you for supporting us, folks. Your money couldn't have been spent on something more significant to humanity. All right, let's get to Willa Cather.
So I'm really excited to talk about Something Wicked This Way Comes.
What'd you think about Something Wicked This Way Comes?
I thought it was really...
What's that sound?
I'm doing it. Yeehaw.
It's right. He's the contextual Texan. You're welcome, sound effects fans. He's the contextual Texan. He's from Texas. He gives us a little much-needed context on the work in question, which today is My Antonia.
Something Wicked This Way Comes.
Yeah.
Something Wicked This Way Comes.
I am not prepared.
No, we're doing My Antonia by Willa Cather. And Brandon's going to give us some much-needed context. Take it away, Brandon.
I'm just going to read the book.
Okay. You're just going to read the book?
Yeah. That's our context.
All right.
No, I think where we should start is on the pronunciation of the name.
Okay. Cather?
No, yeah, that. Is
Cather?
it Cather or Cather?
Cather?
How do you say it?
We established.
Willa Cather.
Yeah. Willa Cather.
And how do you say, how do you say Antonia?
Antonia.
You say Antonia.
The book, the audiobook version that I read said Antonia.
Antonia?
Antonia.
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 Antonia would be the sort of anglicized. Well, I don't know. Let me just pull it up. Actually,
I was just curious.
Maybe it did say my Antonia.
Because I did not know how to make sense of this. So she provides one footnote in this book, and this is just sort of jumping in, like towards the end. But she, being Willa Cather, provides one footnote about the pronunciation of Antonia or Antonia, and I don't know what to make of it. So I felt like the place to begin with context was actually figuring out how to pronounce the book.
H.L. Mencken once wrote, "No romantic novel ever written in America is one half so beautiful as my Antonia." Hi, I'm...
Ha-ha!
More sticky and grimy, but he stayed on the journey. Jake bought everything.
Oh, wait. Get the remixed version of. All right, wait. So we know how Ken Burns says it because he did the introduction to my Audible thing.
Immigrants struggle.
Let me just see how this other guy says it.
To Carrie and Irene Minor, in memory of affections old and true.
I might have went past it.
Optima dies, prima fugit.
Optima dies, prima fugit.
Virgil.
I am so fond of Willa Cather's work.
Come on.
Was the piano score a part of the book?
No. That would have been really gay.
To Carrie and Irene.
He doesn't say it.
He says Antonia, though.
Yeah, maybe. Well, I'm not going to say the name at all this podcast because
what does the note say? Read the note.
The note says the Bohemian name is strongly accented on the first syllable, so we're all doing that.
Right.
I said Antonia too, but then I was listening to an Audible version today, and they were saying Antonia. Like the English name Anthony, and the I is, of course, given the sound of long E.
Well,
the name is pronounced Antonia.
Antonia.
I guess Antonia stresses the T-O-N.
I guess it would make more sense that they all call her...
Antonia stresses the E.
We're not going to figure this out.
We could just call her Tony like they do, I guess.
Tony.
My Tony.
My Tony. All right, we just rechristened the book My Tony.
My Tony.
All right, let's jump in then. And I will say Cather because that rolls off the tongue. So there we go. That's context.
All right. Thank you very much. Baggage.
So Willa Cather, she was born in the late 1800s. I can give you the exact dates if you'd like it. 1873. She died in 1947. She was a writer of American novels.
Oh, was she?
She was. She actually had a childhood very similar to our narrator's childhood. She grew up in Virginia. Her parents left Virginia to follow her grandparents when she was so her parents didn't die in her case, but when she was about, I think 8 or 9, right? They moved out to Nebraska. They lived in a town of about 1,000 that had a little small school and a post office. In fact, around the age of 11, she got a job in the post office, and she was able to take the mail out to all the people in the countryside and was able to meet them and talk to them. And she, as you can tell in the book, she liked to talk to people and observe people and watch their mannerisms, watch their way of speaking. And this was one way that she fell in love with the country, fell in love with the people there from a very young age. She would live in Nebraska for a while, but eventually she did move away. I believe she went to university. Do you know that?
I think she went to the same...
University of Nebraska. So pretty much very similar to Jimmy's story. She started writing in the 20s, well, I guess actually earlier than the 20s and the teens because this was published in 1918. This is part of a trilogy of books that focus on life in the Nebraska prairies. You have the Song of the Lark, O Pioneers, in my Antonia.
But it's a thematic trilogy, right? It's not the same characters.
No, it's not the same characters. I do believe that Thea Kronberg, if I remember correctly, she might appear in O Pioneers and the Song of the Lark. Or it might just be the Song of the Lark. But my Antonia is unique in that it's kind of her love song to the Nebraska plains and to the people who lived there. And so it's a beautiful book, but it's also, the structure of it is different than a lot of the other things we've read. And so it's something that we can discuss at length, I suppose.
Yes.
But so she wrote this in 1918. She had already had some other successes with novels and some short stories before then, but this was considered pretty much immediately to be her masterpiece. People who read it thought it was a masterpiece, and even today, most scholars look back at this as her masterpiece. Just some other things of interest about her life. She was never married. She had intense friendships with women. She went and actually lived with a woman in New York for a while. Of course, you have a lot of scholars that try to say that she was a lesbian, but there's not any evidence from her own letters or from anything like that she actually was a lesbian. Somebody that I read somewhere, who was actually a fairly liberal scholar, was complaining about all the other liberal scholars doing this to Cather, saying it's anachronistic, privilege to try and read the lesbianism back into Cather's past, which was interesting seeing that come from their own camp. Anyways, that's an interesting little tidbit. Something else interesting I found about her is that she is seen as having a very masculine style versus a feminine style, and that she herself, she saw her biggest influences being the great American writers and also the great British novelists. She liked Jane Austen and she liked other lady writers, but she saw them as having a sort of soft style that she didn't want to mimic with her own. And so
her books are mostly written from first person and written from the point of view of a man, correct?
Yeah. Like this is written from Jim's perspective. Right. And so, of course, the question is he believable as a man? Do we think that she actually writes men well? And
a question we will endeavor to answer later on in this very program.
Yeah.
Or maybe next episode.
Because the closest comparison we've had in the history of the Bookening is, what was her name? Marilyn Robinson, writing from the perspective of somebody in the plains.
Right.
In fact, probably drawing direct influence from Cather.
Wait, what was his name? Wasn't it very similar to Jim Burden?
Bundren.
So we had John Bundren and Jim Burden.
Yeah. I mean, there were definite parallels, and looking at those two novels together is something you could do if you wanted to. If you wanted to write for any young high schoolers out there looking for a compare-contrast idea, I guess you could. Anyway, so that's a brief overview of her life. She not a whole lot to say about her life. She wasn't like she had an overly exciting one. But she did note that the young ages of a writer, usually from around the age of 8 to 12, have the most influence over their works later in life. You definitely see that with Dickens. He wrote a whole lot about orphans, and he wrote a whole lot about London and canning factories and the poor in London. I think you could probably make that argument that you see that with quite a few of the authors that we've read. Steinbeck, Jane Austen. Those are the worlds that they grew up in.
My understanding is that Cather wrote her first novel about London, and then she had somebody that she looked up to convince her how to take her aside and convince her to write about her childhood and about the plains.
And it is something that a lot of authors talk about, that this nostalgia for the past and childhood that comes back, and you write what you know, right? And you don't focus on things that you're not familiar with. And so the Nebraska prairie, this love for the Nebraska prairie, and it's just all throughout this book, and for the people of Nebraska. And so, anything you guys wanted to add about her biography?
I have things in support of her lesbianism that I don't want to say because I'd rather just skip right over it.
What's an example? We can.
An example would be that she spent at least part of her college years dressing like a man and going by the name William.
Yeah, I forgot to add that point. That was something I would have added.
But I think really is.
And there's actually a picture of her dressed in men's garb on like the deck of a ship, and she's dressed up as this character. She was William. She was known as William, called William. That seems to really support, yeah.
Then the other thing in support, if I'm not mistaken, my Antonia was written right in the wake of being, I think her closest friend who she had lived with decided to get married or to move away or something.
Yeah.
So within months of her friend Isabel deciding to marry a violinist, she wrote this. It totally wrecked her relationship with this friend. Like, she felt shocked. According to this, she felt shocked and betrayed, and that was basically the end of their friendship until very late in life when it was restored.
Huh.
Jim and Antonia style.
Well, maybe this is one of those critics that just really wants to make her out to seem like a lesbian. But this seems to be...
This critic absolutely wants her to be a lesbian. Yeah, he just states it. He assumes it, and then he like has a little bit of like, I don't know whether or not we read too much into my Antonia because she was a butch lesbian. You know, that's another question.
Yeah.
But
We don't actually have any evidence one way or another.
nope.
And I just think that sort of historical gossip, I kind of feel this way. We've always put off having this discussion because I don't know that everyone in this room agrees, but I sort of feel this way too about Lewis Carroll, which is in lieu of actually having anything but the most circumstantial. Now, Lewis Carroll, let's take him back off the table because you could argue maybe that you have some stuff with him.
Yes, we have some circumstantial evidence.
we have some, but with Willick, okay, fine. This is why we're not having the Lewis Carroll discussion.
You brought him up.
Well, because I think this could extend to him, but by the dirty looks you guys are both giving me, I see that it can't. In Willa Cather's case, we do not know. We just don't know. We have some circumstantial stuff. We have some stuff that feels mannish, and we have some stuff that if you were a pastor maybe and you had that person in your church, you'd say, okay, But we just don't know, so who cares?
Yeah, she was a writer and she was famous and she knew a lot of famous people, but it wasn't an overly eventful life. She was private, and so we don't really know a lot. She lived. We know. I wish I remembered this lady's name. We know that she lived with a woman in New York together. They had a house together. It wasn't Isabel.
No.
Right. No, her name
was after
Edith.
Isabel.
It was
What?
It was the woman that became her literary
Edith Lewis.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Edith. Yeah.
Her
Executor after she died, or
an
whatever.
editor and all that.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. But it's not outside the realm of possibility that she was a woman who simply didn't marry. They're you know, I mean, I think when I think about scripture, you have like, you don't condemn a man without 2 or 3 witnesses. You don't excommunicate a man. You know, both Old and New Testament, we have precedent for not making any harsh judgments about anyone without any actual evidence. And so if you don't have it, you don't have it.
Well, look, there are men in our church that are single, and
I can think of at least one.
in their mid to late 30s or 40s or beyond, and they room with other men and have for some time. And you know what? We talk to them about, you know, whether or not they have same-sex temptations and care for them, but that doesn't mean that they're...
Yeah, you'd be foolish not to ask the question as a pastor, but decades removed from having any chance of being Willa Cather's pastor, I think you can just say, you know what, we don't know.
We don't know.
As far as we don't really see it in her work, except for insofar as there's a sort of weird, you could maybe argue asexual quality to the book that, or something.
You could argue, certainly there are things about Willa Cather that aren't feminine, right?
You could argue that about Dorothy Sayers, definitely about Dorothy Sayers, who I've heard people try to make the argument that she was a lesbian too, because I don't believe she was ever married.
Surprised they haven't come after Jane Austen. They probably have, but
they have.
I've managed to avoid that.
Lots of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just, I mean, they try to then write her biography. She's a lesbian, and so then why do you do that? Well, it's because you want to read my Antonia as a lesbian book.
Right.
So you want to read it through the lens of lesbian literary criticism.
Right.
Queer theory. Which is just stupid theory. So we don't do stupid things. We stay away from stupid things and stupid people. So
0% stupidity on the Bookening.
That's right. No stupidity here.
No stupid is a stupid free zone.
Yeah. Optima Dies, prima fugit. A lesbian doesn't know Latin.
Yep. There's never been a lesbian that's known Latin.
We all know that.
Except for the people that lived on the island of Lesbos or whatever.
That's right. So,
yes, have we dealt with that to everyone's satisfaction?
I think so.
All right. I'll bring down the Bookening gavel. Hey, it's another sound effect.
Judge Nathan is in session.
We will move on. Brandon, what else you got context?
Well, that's a nice segue into just some of the historical background to this novel. Lena Lingard, she's one of the characters here. She's actually a good example of the new sort of freedom that was available to women, good or bad, in the early 1900s. And it would make it possible for a woman like the author of this book, Willa Cather. Willa Catheter. Keep wanting to say catheter.
Yes, I've said that.
Willa Cather to go and make a living and live in New York with her female publisher and die in 1947, whenever she died, alone and a spinster. And it was lots of different reasons for it. America's growing prosperity, as we see in this novel, the just hard work of these women going out and making the living for themselves. But then you also had the available markets and means that were coming because of America's prosperity, changes in the global market, changes in America's place in the global market, all these sorts of things that were happening and allowed for you to have this class, a growing middle class in America, but also then income available for women so that they didn't have to get married. If, like Lena Lingard, they thought getting married only got you, an angry father? Is that what she said?
Yeah.
Be like Tiny and go make their fortune at, what did she do? Like an Alaskan, was it a gold?
Yeah, she ran
gold rush?
a sailor's bar.
Yeah.
And then she helped found a town.
Yeah.
Dawson's Creek or something, right? She's founded that TV show. Yeah. Became a millionaire.
Savvy enough to know where people were going to be in instead of going for the gold, went for the saloon and place to stay or whatever.
And so you have a lot of these women characters. You have, Frances? Hindgren or whatever the name was.
I don't remember how to say it.
But she's one of these figures. You have Tiny. You have Lena, who Lena ends up living with Tiny, right? And you have...
No.
Wait, yeah, maybe.
Because Lena can make the dresses for Tiny, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they're
So
like...
they both end up in San Francisco together.
Yeah.
That's right.
So these strong female characters that have independent means, which are just mirrors to not Edith. I keep wanting to say Edith Wharton because we're going to talk about Edith Wharton. Willa Cather herself. So that's a bit of the background to where these characters are coming from that populate this novel. You also have, in here you do have the disparity that's a little bit disappearing between the wealthy classes who have these established farms and then the immigrant classes who are coming in and trying to make a living for themselves, like the Meridans and their tragic little story that happens there. But you see similar stories in the second novel we ever read, East of Eden.
Yeah.
So you just see echoes of this in English literature and in American literature, but with this novel in particular, you actually have pride of place given to the immigrants and their stories in a way that it hadn't been before. And so that's where Edith Wharton comes into the picture. I don't know, have you ever read any Edith Wharton books? Mm-mm. She wrote Ethan Frome and... it's not an American in Paris.
No. I have not. But I always get her confused with other people. Which
Edith Nesbit. What's the famous novel that she wrote? It's about the man who falls in love with the woman, but he can't marry her because he's married.
That sounds like just about every novel ever.
Yeah, but this is a famous one. The Age of Innocence. In fact, there's a Martin Scorsese movie based on
pretty good
this
one.
book. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, so Edith Wharton, she was a famous American writer right at the same time. I think she was born maybe a decade earlier than Willa Cather, but she's a good parallel to Willa because she's a good parallel because she was writing about the upper class American families, the ones that most other people would be writing about at the time. She was actually nominated for a Nobel Prize multiple times. And then you have Cather come in with her book, and she's writing about a very different subject matter. She's writing about the immigrant families out on the Nebraska plains and the hardships that they're facing. So that you do have your wealthy families, you do have Jim, and you do have the Burdens, which for everything we can tell in the story, they do fairly well for themselves. I mean, he has enough means to become a great Western railway lawyer in New York City. And in fact, part one ends with, what does she say to him? If I live here like you, that is different. Things will be easy for you, but they will be hard for us. And then each section of the book, you have the hired girls, you have Lena Lingard, the pioneer woman's story. So it's the stories about these women and how they were shaped by this landscape and how they survived and became the hardy women that Jim ends up admiring, because all the city women, they're soft, so they don't know how to run a household, and all these immigrant country girls end up actually being useful to their husbands and help their households thrive, which is their... Say what?
I said,
one of your favorite parts?
That was one of my favorite little descriptions of how...
I was thinking about you the whole time, how we got to get you a little Norwegian immigrant girl out in...
Yeah, that's why it was my favorite part.
Country girls.
I was just like, yeah. Hired girls. Whoa. Maybe I can get my shrew of a wife on a train. And what was that guy's name? Chip
Wick Cutter.
Wick Cutter.
Or something weird like that. Was it?
Wick Cutter.
Talking about a disgusting character.
Old Wick Cutter. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Anyways.
Not Wick Cutter, is it?
Yeah.
It's something like that. Wick. It's the Cutters.
It might just be a nickname. I mean, he's got like a really evil.
I never thought about that. Wick Cutter.
Yeah, Wick Cutter. He's Wick Cutter. He's like he's got a very snidely Whiplashian sort of a name, whatever it is.
So, anyways, you got old Wick Cutter.
Mm-hmm.
That's derailed somehow. What
I'm sorry.
You and the higher girls.
You want me to marry a Norwegian girl?
Yeah, Edith Wharton, all that jazz.
All the kinds of girls that Antonia admired, and so did Jim, and all that.
Yeah, and so I guess the last two things to kind of touch on would be the larger thematic things that this is doing and its position within the themes of literary history with those.
Touch away.
Let's touch away on that. That sounds so exciting.
Brandon, it does sound exciting. Don't denigrate yourself.
Thank you, Nate.
Everyone loves your context.
Memory.
All alone in the moonlight.
Yeah. This book is in the great train of novels that are thinking about the past and ruminating on the past and the nostalgia that's a part of that. One of my personal favorites that falls into this vein is David Copperfield, but it goes as far back as Tristram Shandy. One thing that they have in common is most of them are told from the perspective of a first-person narrator because, I mean, that just makes sense if you have a book that's going to be heavily dealing with themes of memory and loss and the past. It's going to be told from a character who has memories and thoughts about the past, and they're now writing this down, which is another reason that this has obvious influence over Marilynne Robinson, because her story, it's epistolary, and that automatically fits into this category. So you have this first-person narrator. I don't get the sense that Cather really wants us to see this as an unreliable narrator. I don't have any reason to believe that.
No, the only thing I think maybe to be said about that is you're definitely getting as much of how Jim feels about things as how he thinks about things. And so everything is cast in the warm glow of his nostalgia. And
he sort of knows. I mean, there's a reason he has the manuscript. It says Antonia, and then he's like, I better write my Antonia, which I think is an affectionate thing to do, but also a way of saying, I know this is filtered through
my experience, my nostalgia. And he at one point, I think also, he's talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't there places where he talks about wanting to forget about Antonia? It's about not wanting to see her. It's about not wanting to see her again, because if he saw her again, then whatever memory he had of her might be destroyed by reality, and he prefers the memory. He prefers what he remembers, but then every time he sees her, he feels the memory's true. So anyhow, the point of that is he's very self-aware that he may be casting and is probably casting things in a warm glow, but he doesn't really care.
Right. He's a reliable narrator insofar as he's giving you the facts of the situation, and not insofar as he's filtering them. He knows it and you know it, sort of. But we'll talk more about, we'll return to that later on in our discussion, I think.
But it's a part of this tradition, and it's a rich tradition. You see a lot of it. And but the other interesting thematic thing she's doing with the novel, which is kind of unique to this book in particular, but also pointing towards other things that were happening in literature at the time. Each chapter kind of works as its own little short story. It's not necessarily building one big narrative for you. Instead, you have little snippets of experience, which again is quite a bit like Gilead.
Right.
It's almost like portraits that you're getting. Some chapters will just be a picture of one person, maybe Lena, maybe this other Norwegian family, maybe it'll be the Cutters. Then another chapter will be just this one event that happened, and it builds up to a story about Antonia, but not a story as we would traditionally think about it. It doesn't necessarily have a narrative arc or plot to it, like a Dickens story, for example.
Right.
But the portrait that he builds is telling a story also, because you can plot something. Things definitely happen to Antonia, but the structure's different than other novels that had come before it.
Part of what I feel like is so masterful about it, it feels so effortless.
The way she does it.
Yeah. And it's engaging, and you're not feeling like you're following, the train. You're not on a train. You're not following an arc.
Yeah, like with Dickens, you would say, like, and 3 months later, this happened, or the next night, this happened. With this, you're not really necessarily getting that. Each one, like I said, is kind of its own self-contained story. Has hints of Southern literature and a lot of things that would interest the Southern people writing at the time, but not Southern literature. It's its own thing. It's Midwest literature, I guess, or the Plains literature. So, but But yeah, so as far as just the structure, it's very unique as far as I know. She wasn't cribbing off of anyone.
Well, we'll come back to talk about that a little bit more, too.
But yeah, that's pretty much all I've got. So.
All right, well, what's that sound? It's the airplane. Indicating baggage check, the part of the show where we discuss our baggage, the baggage that we brought to the book. That is, Jake, what baggage did you bring to Willa Cathetter's My Antonia?
So this is the baggage I knew I was bringing, and I guess the baggage I didn't know I was bringing. The baggage I knew I was bringing was Will Cather is one of those people that a certain style of academic, I want to say faux intellectual, agrarian type really likes to trot out. And so that whole, everything about that feels icky to me, and I don't like it.
I mean, we make fun of them all the time on the Bookening, specifically in our circles. It'd be like a conservative, Christian-y kind of Catholic a lot of time. Barry, what's his name? Not Wallace.
Wendell
Berry is the big one.
There's a certain kind of person that likes to pretend like they're going to be a homesteading, shire-dwelling type of, we're going to have our own self-sufficient garden and, we're going to be agrarian, and it's a part of our Christianity. And
I'll be outside smoking my pipe, not looking at my iPad, because I would never have anything like that.
That's right. And I'm going to talk like I would imagine a Tolkien character would talk whenever I get a chance to. And I hold in highest regard Tolkien, Wendell Berry, and Willa Cather.
We love those people.
Absolutely love those people.
We are. Jake, you like to light up your pipe.
I light up my pipe.
Read your Wendell Berry. And
it's all about the Shire. God wanted us to live in the Shire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Drink your whiskey, whatever. Grow your beard out.
Your pint.
Yeah, so I find that whole subculture to be
obnoxious and terrible.
Pretty obnoxious, yeah. So there was a little bit of that kind of stigma that I brought to this book, which I shed pretty quickly. Oh, Marilyn Robinson also actually fits right in there too, and we'd already experienced Marilyn Robinson. So,
but you especially not so much in the episodes themselves, but when we did our year in review or whatever, you were the closest thing that Marilyn Robinson had in the Bookening verse to a Defender.
That's right.
So,
this is. As I like to say, in a whole nother galaxy.
Right.
So
out of it.
Out of.
I thought this book really. Maybe we'll get into this later. I thought this book really helped me put my finger on why Marilyn Robinson was the worst. I mean, like
what characters that you care about and love, and a plot that matters and is gripping.
Some understanding of the nature of good and evil when she's not even trying, whereas Marilyn Robinson was like, I will write about good and evil and I know nothing about it, but I can quote random Calvin things. And shut up, Marilyn Robinson.
Talk about raindrops.
Yeah. Marilyn Robinson was a good poet, but a crappy novelist.
Well, I don't know that I go so far as to call her a crappy novelist. I'm going to judge that to be overstatement, but yeah, Willa Cather is something else.
Out of this galaxy.
Out of this galaxy. So that's the baggage I brought, and I quickly, as I said, shed it. The other baggage that I brought was just being a Midwesterner, and I didn't realize how big a deal that was or would be to me reading this book. But so for a little bit of personal context, my family... So I'm like 3/4 British Isles.
If you're going to give a family history, I think you have to talk about Demon Menzel, even though it has nothing to do with anything.
I will talk about Demon Menzel. I don't know if he's related or not.
Demon Menzel?
There's a Demon Menzel.
All right, so here's the thing. I know that my family, the quarter of my family that is represented by the name Menzel sailed here from Hamburg, Germany. But Menzel's not a proper German name. It's Prussian, so it's like German, but also Czech or Austrian or something else that's not exactly German. And so there are Menzels in Germany, there are Menzels in Bohemia, as it turns out, and there are Menzels in Austria, and there are a lot of Jewish Menzels, and then there are Menzels that came to America at the same time that the Shimerdas would have, and traveled across. They came in Maryland, and they traveled across, and then they either tended to dump down into Missouri or up in Wisconsin, and they're scattered along the way. And my family would have come over speaking whatever they would have spoken at the same time that the Shimerdas would have come over. At the same time, that part of the family, my this is weird, or maybe it's not so weird because it's just what happened in the book, and so it was a lot of what happened. So that would have been actually Jacob Menzel and his wife Sophia came. And then they had a son, Clarence, and his wife, Minnie, came over as a little girl from Virginia in Indiana.
There you go.
And Clarence would have grown up speaking whatever he spoke, and she would have come over from Virginia speaking, having, a little longer history in the States and met. And so it's
like a reverse.
Yeah, it is but so that's part of my own personal family history. And so I think that we were probably Austrian, like Otto Fuchs, because I am a 6'4", blonde-haired, blue-eyed male.
Cannot deny it.
But I also have a brother who's
Aryan perfection.
I also have a brother who's 5'7" with dark hair. So I don't know. Who knows? We're all muttly. I'm a Midwestern mutt. That's the point. And, and then on the other side of my family, my stepmom's family came from England. They were farmers, and my stepmom's mom and dad are still farmers to this day and in the Midwest. And so the culture of the Midwest and Midwest kind of farm community and all that, those roots go deep down. And so that was some baggage I guess I didn't know I was bringing, but it felt like I was very much reading a kind of personal history of...
You felt some real connection to it?
Yeah, my heritage, yeah.
Talking about Demon Menzel, though.
Demon Menzel, there is a guy who shares my last name. I can never find his first name, but what I can find are 3 not first names for him. One is Colonel Menzel, the other is Demon Menzel, and the other is Bloody Menzel.
Wow!
And he was a Prussian colonel, conquered a lot of France, was a bloody, nasty, awful man, and made himself rich, taxed the crap out of people, and sent out an edict that if you didn't pay your taxes, whatever taxes that he was using to enlarge his coffers, he would cut off your nose and ears and make you a public spectacle before he hung you.
Wow. We thought the IRS was bad.
and so then one day, Voltaire wrote about this guy.
Really?
Actually, yeah. Huh. Or referenced him at least. In the same way I think that we would reference Hitler.
Wow.
Yeah, it's your Mother Teresa, then you got your Demon Menzel on the other.
This is some great lineage here.
Anyhow, one day the guy gets insanely drunk and is waving his sword around, just taunting the French people he's conquered, and somebody pulls a gun and shoots him in the head, and that's the end of Demon Menzel.
Well, that's a good end for Demon Menzel, I guess.
But not before he passed on his dark lineage.
Haven't we read about bloodthirsty Bohemians before?
Haven't we read about them?
Wasn't that Dracula?
Dracula was a bit of a bloodthirsty Bohemian, if ever there was one.
So is Jake a vampire?
Jake a vampire?
It's not Bohemian, is he?
No, he was.
I have never seen Jake drink any blood.
Okay.
I have seen him cut off a guy's nose and ears before he hung him, but he did not drink the blood out of those.
Runs deep in the family.
Newly created facial cavities. Well, Jake, I hope that no one ever shoots you in the head while you are drunkenly taunting them. French or otherwise.
My wife's French.
Well, okay. Well, but you felt some kinship to the Midwestern.
That's the point. I felt like I was reading some of my heritage here. It was really sweet and
you felt
nice.
A connection to it, yeah.
Yeah.
Brandon, though, he's from Texas. He probably didn't feel any connection to all. He's probably like, what's this boring story about stupid Midwestern bumbling
badgers and prairie dogs. One of these. I have felt that connection with writers before, though.
Right, like Blood Meridian, probably Cormac McCarthy.
Actually, it's a horrible thing. But when I read Cormac McCarthy, one reason I love his book so much is that he is describing the Texas plains where my great-grandparents had land up in the panhandle of Texas, and then basically that is the country he was describing. If you ever seen the movie No Country for Old Men, the way that it opens with those long landscape shots, that's the sort of stuff that I would have Thanksgiving in. So it's, in other words, it's nice when you find that in a novel.
Oh, yeah.
That nostalgia like that.
I was looking for that in Faulkner because my mom's family came up from Mississippi, but no.
Yeah, you don't want to find yourself in Faulkner.
Yeah, you
may need a psychiatrist.
So what baggage did you bring to this book, sir?
I have read this book twice, and both of those times were for a class. So That's my baggage. The first time I read it was with a professor who was the best professor I had as an undergrad. And so I read this book with him in class. He was a great teacher and he taught it well. I loved it when I read it in his class and read it again as as a grad student and loved it. So that's my baggage with this book.
Your baggage is you read it twice, you loved it twice.
Yeah, best teacher I've ever had.
And now you're the best teacher that thousands of listeners to the Bookening ever had.
Oh, yeah.
And they love this book.
If you're out there, Ron, thank you.
Let's see. What baggage did I bring to this book? I brought similar baggage to Jake's first piece of baggage, which is that I have a real chip on my shoulder about people that quote Willa Cather or Wendell Berry or any of that kind of nostalgic equating, especially the Christian version of it, where Christians somehow equate conservative Christianity with going back to a time before they invented penicillin. I just find that kind of thing really obnoxious, and I don't think that godliness has anything to do with smoking a pipe on a porch and looking at a beautiful sunset glance across the prairie or whatever. So I was a little bit antagonistic to this book. I also brought my antagonism towards Gilead, which I thought was just the way that Gilead ended. And I wasn't on the Gilead episode, obviously. I never really got a chance to give my thoughts on that book. I really didn't care for it. It had some really beautifully written passages, but the characters and the way that the story wrapped up and what she was doing with the story, just I found obnoxious, and I didn't like it at all. So, I mean, that was a book that probably I could have gone either way on it, but the ending really, really made me not like it. So I was trying to be as open-minded as possible, but also just having sort of accidental baggage against this book. And I knew it wasn't fair to, Willa Cather didn't deserve my baggage, but I also just knew I didn't like a lot of things that I sort of associated with that sort of thing.
I really hesitated starting it for a while.
Yeah.
For all of those reasons, because it's just like, oh man, this is going to be a drudge.
A slog, yeah.
Yeah, well, and I sort of thought, even if it's good, I've probably read a bunch of things like it. Like, how many descriptions of sunsets on the prairie do I have to read in my life before I've got my fill? Like, what is she going to do?
Read Laura Ingalls Wilder in 5th grade.
Yeah, I've read that. I've read different stories like this. I've read Cormac McCarthy for that sort of stark landscape. I've read lots of different stuff. So what is Willa Cather going to give me? Turns out quite a bit. But I was talking to Jake about it because he was telling me about how he felt like a connection to this book and it helped explain things about it. And he was thinking about his past and his relationship to the place that he lived. I've never really had those kinds of feelings in my life all that much. The fact that I'm a Midwesterner seems to me to be a fairly incidental fact, if not one that I'm vaguely antagonistic towards. Not that I don't like the Midwest, but I've never felt any particular pride of place or interest of place. It's one of the reasons why it would be difficult for me to write any kind of a novel, I think. If I was just someone pointed a gun at my head and said, write a novel, capturing place would be hard for me because it's not something that I tend to think probably subconsciously somehow there is a lot of the Midwest in me, because everything about the book was evocative and rang true, but it's just one of those things about myself I haven't really explored, and maybe
we'll do it more next book when we read Something Wicked This Way Comes.
Yeah, Something Wicked This Way Comes. If you want to know the landscape of that Nathan grew up in, it was the landscape of the Dark Carnival. So,
a small community in Illinois.
I am a Midwesterner. I can't escape that. I know I have connections to the place, and I know I have a connection to a certain kind of town and but it's just not something I've considered. To be fair,
you grew up in Bloomington, which is
kind of a weird place to grow up.
It's a very weird place. It's very atypical of the middle. It's very different from Evansville.
We've got IU University for people that don't know. So we're somewhat cosmopolitan, but we're still really small. We're a small town.
It's a town of 70,000 people.
We got 2 movie theaters,
one mall,
5 or 6 McDonald's. It's not a big town.
But it's very liberal, hippie, crunchy, progressive.
We've got the Kinsey Institute here in town. We've got, it's very liberal. Yeah, you just said it. I don't need to repeat it. Yeah.
Well, there's a reason why. Well, if you listen to The World We Made,
yes,
that Advocate.com calls Bloomington a mecca for gays in the Grain Belt or something like that.
It's a very heteroflexible town. So it's kind of a weird town.
always ranked in the top 5 gay-friendly cities in the country. And so it's just very like, it's not what you think of when you think of the Midwest. Just like Austin in some ways is not what you think of when you think of Texas. But Bloomington is smaller and more insular. And I think that actually means the university culture has even tighter control on the culture of Bloomington than like UT does.
Yeah, I mean, I've lived in
or UW has on Madison.
I've lived in a university town, other university towns, and they don't like the culture of. I mean, I lived in Lafayette, where Purdue University is, and in Lafayette there is a river between West Lafayette and Lafayette proper, and Lafayette proper just feels like a towny Indiana town. You cross the river, then suddenly you're in the university, and the people there are much richer and more liberal, and everything that comes with that. Bloomington, the culture of the university seems to have permeated the entire town. And if you imagine Indiana as a map, you imagine a red state with a big blue dot near southern Indiana, which is Bloomington. I mean, and I think if I had to define my relationship to place, it would be a somewhat displaced sort of, like if you pointed a gun at me and said, "What are you?" I'd say, well, I don't know. I'm kind of a small town cosmopolitan liberal. I'm not a liberal, but I'm not I'm not comfortable with the car mechanics of Martinsville, which is one town over from us, with the factory workers. It's just it is kind of a weird place to grow up. So I don't know if that's helpful baggage, but that is my relationship to place has always been kind of weird, I guess. So it was interesting thinking about that. I don't know if there would be much more to say about that, but it was interesting seeing it through Jake's eyes and realizing he was like, "This book is explaining me, man." And I was like, this book is good, but I really like it. I don't know if it's explaining me. Did this book explain you, Brandon?
Probably not in the same way that it explains Jake.
Yeah, you've got to read Blood Meridian to understand Brandon.
Oh, man.
He's like the judge.
Yeah, that's me. Dancing with that bear.
Dancing with the bear. Yep. Brandon does dance with bears, and he is responsible for the murder of millions. All right. Any other baggage anybody wants to talk about brought to this thing?
No.
A resounding no from Brandon Chastain. All right. Well,
got a long list of questions there, Nathan.
It's a pretty short list, actually, compared to my normal list. So maybe I'll try and burn through these and get us out of here. Where do we want to start? I don't know. Let's start with Antonia. What did you guys think about that Antonia? Pretty open-ended question, I realize. But
that is a very open-ended question. I thought she was great.
You thought she was great.
I liked my Antonia.
You liked your Antonia.
Yeah.
What did you like about her?
Jake, what did I like about her?
You liked what I liked about her.
You guys,
obviously.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to hear it.
Which is that she's awesome.
She was awesome.
It's after midnight already, so Antonia is a beautiful, sweet girl who loves her family, is proud of her family and the people that she loves, who works hard and sacrifices herself for the good of her family, who suffers because she's a trusting person and who still comes out all right in the end. And so she's somebody that you have a lot of reason to have sympathy for. And the way that she responds to things, it's not always beautiful. Sometimes I think Jim gives us some, good balance of her doing some dumb things or things that are, that we don't like. But
yeah, her treatment of Jake, for example.
But
it's
then
pretty nasty.
It's connected to her loyalty to her family.
Yeah.
But it is still nasty.
But the way she does it is pretty nasty.
The way she does it is like, very nasty, yeah.
It's the closest she gets to becoming her mother, who's not the most likable woman in the world.
Which is important because we need to feel like she can become her mother.
Oh, yeah. I think that's that's some of the
you
drama.
have to have the drama and the tension that she could be.
She could be spoiled. And Jim needs to always be wondering if she's going to be afraid that she's going to be spoiled.
Which that's kind of the balance or the tension the novel plays. Each section is the risk that she could become someone else that's in that section.
Yeah.
So she could become the other hired girls.
Right.
And then, in fact, she kind of becomes worse in the eyes of the townspeople because she gets disgraced. While Lena and Tiny go off and become successes in their own right.
I thought, just to speak to what you were talking about earlier about it having a different kind of a plot structure than a lot of novels we've read, I found the book to be very compelling. Like I wanted to read it, and yet it didn't have that engine of is Dracula going to kill Mina or not?
It wasn't suspense. It wasn't like oh, what's going to happen next?
But I would argue, I'm about to say that it is, actually. I mean, I think that it has a lot of other things that are beautiful about it, but the driving question, I think she sets it up nicely. I think a book like this does actually have the bones of classic story structure beneath it. They're just well hidden, because I wanted to know how Antonia was going to end up, and it was clever of her to start it with Jim being kind of married to some lady that didn't care about him, obviously a disappointed man.
That whole introduction is really clever.
So that you always have this question of, well, what's going to happen? You know they're not going to end up together, but how and what's going to happen to Antonia? And I think it does kind of pick up steam and pull you through. I'm not arguing that it's the same kind of narrative as like Bram Stoker or whatever the example you want to use, but I think there are questions that you want answered that do pull you through. It would be wrong to say that this book has no backbone to it or no structure. That's just a collection of it is a beautiful collection of short stories in one sense. Each chapter is its own thing, but
it's a character study,
right?
Yeah, and you're interested in how does she end up, and how is it come to be that Jim's not married to her?
Right. Yeah.
What is the thing that happens is absolutely the
and you sort of want to know how Jim,
to figure out.
Why did Jim's obviously a person that's connected to the romance of the land, of the people, of everything.
Why is he in New York City?
Why is he this New York lawyer whose wife throws parties that he doesn't care about? And it's like
fake poets and stuff come to their house.
Yeah. She's just hosting.
He has no interest in them. He's
the elites or whatever.
We never find out who his wife is, right?
No,
we do know that she was it was an advantageous marriage, and she was a New York City girl, and
right, it's nobody.
That it was like her father in the community was scandalized that she married somebody from the plains or something like that.
What did you guys think as far as I guess just to answer the other question that Brandon brought up in his context, as far as not that it has an unreliable narrator, but the tension between the fact that Jim is looking at this nostalgically and he knows it is Antonia actually someone that has this inner light? Is Willa Cather saying, here's a character that you should know, reader, because this is a woman that had this inner light, and she took, she went out into the orchard and suddenly you understood why orchards exist. Is she that woman, or is that just how Jim sees her? Are we just seeing Jim give her all this power because he's nostalgic for a very special time in his life in a very special place, or is Antonia actually a special woman?
Well, I think Antonia is a special woman. Everyone sees her as useful and they like her. Her father likes her the best. Jim's granddad likes her. The townspeople all like her until she becomes disgraced.
But then they still like her because she's poor Antonia.
Yeah.
And Jim's angry that she made herself something pitiable, but they feel pity for her.
So there is something unique and likable about her. But I also do think that there's a lot of the other part to it as well, of him just has the glow of nostalgia, especially in the early parts of the book. And even the way in which he remembers her father, for example.
Right. That was the most startling disconnect between, it wasn't an unreliable narrator, but it was just like, this guy blew his own brains out and then sat in the cold shed. It's a horrific tragedy.
Abandoned his family
by a very cowardly man, ultimately.
He did what Mr. Bennett could never do.
Right. Blow his own brains out.
Yeah.
That's one way to look at it. Yes.
I kept thinking of Mr. Bennett and Mrs. Bennett with their relationship.
I thought about them with Jim and his current wife, and yeah, I did think about them a little bit too. I sort of felt like Mr. and Mrs. Shimerda were maybe important to the story as, I don't quite want to say symbols, but they both seemed to represent the bad way that, like, Mr. Shimerden was a romantic and nostalgic, and he blew his brains out. Jim was romantic, nostalgic, and he ultimately was able to make peace with the past and the present coming together.
So you have Jim and you have Mr. Shimerda, and they're both stuck looking backwards.
Right.
You have Mrs. Shimerda, who got their whole family where they got by looking miles ahead of herself.
Right.
And that's the way that Ambrose drives too. So you do have, I think, I don't know if, it just occurred to me while you were saying it, it does seem like you have this dichotomy of people that are stuck looking way back or looking way ahead,
right.
Being very forward thinking.
It's just to the point you were saying, it's the risk that both of their characters have.
Right.
He could go that way, she could go the other way.
Well, the fact is, Jim is living in the past, and he does have.
Yeah, but I want to argue
real
that
life.
I think I want to say that the ending is a good thing for Jim, because you could certainly make an argument, and me and Jake have talked about this some off mic, that the whole character of Jim is an effeminate loser weirdo who is stuck fantasizing about some woman from his past, when he probably should figure out something with his weirdo wife or whatever, his real actual wife. Especially if you compare him to Mr. Shimerda, whose affection for the past and hatred of the present causes him to blow his brains out. I want to say that there's some triumph for Jim saying, you know what, I'm not going to spend another 20 years mooning and thinking about how wonderful the past was. I'm just going to go meet the adult Antonia. I'm going to find what's still good about her, except that she's old and has kids and a husband, and I'll take the kids hunting. I mean, it kind of seems like, okay, cool, now we can have an adult relationship. The past can be put where it belongs, and maybe that's a good thing.
It doesn't seem to me that Jim actually wants to put the past where it belongs. Jim wrote this book in the heat of passion. You should have written something about Antonia. Oh, I'm going to go. He'd already struck up the friendship with her. I don't know.
So it's a depressing story of an idiot.
They can't get over his past.
We got into our off-mic conversation now.
Well, here's the last paragraph. Can we read it?
It doesn't have to be one or the other. It doesn't have to be a depressing story of an idiot or a totally redemptive, beautiful.
I'm not saying it's a total redemptive, beautiful thing, though. I'm just saying...
I think it is a mix of both, because if you read the last paragraph, this was the road over which Antonia and I came on that night when we got off the train at Black Hawk and were bedded down in the straw, wondering children being taken we knew not whither. I had only to close my eyes to hear the rumbling of the wagons in the dark, and to be again overcome by that obliterating strangeness. The feelings of that night were so near that I could reach out and touch them with my hand. I had the sense of coming home to myself, and of having found out what a little circle man's experience is. For Antonia, that's fine so far. For Antonia and for me, this had been the road of destiny, had taken us to those early accidents of fortune which predetermined for us all that we can ever be. Now I understood that the same road was to bring us together again. Whatever we had missed, we possessed together the precious, the incommunicable past. So he's either getting at just that the reality that you have with certain people in your life, that you've got this deep past with them and experiences that you share. And because you share those things with them, your life is shaped around theirs and their life is shaped around yours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, it's what you have with family for sure.
Yeah, well, and Jim didn't have a family.
Yeah.
Right? Jim didn't have siblings. Jim didn't have a mom and dad. He had his grandma and his grandpa who were old. Yeah. And what he did have was this relationship with this girl, this bond that they shared, and all this hard stuff that they walked through together. And so it's perfectly natural for him to be sort of stuck on her. She was sort of both a sister figure and a mother figure. And this sort of romantic but not thing that is always being toyed with.
But you also get the sense that
they both are doing pretty well for themselves. But at the same time, Jim is a grown-up married man living in New York City with a family who's stuck on this girl he's always...
Yeah, and he's coming back to find her and to see her and...
to play with her kids and...
take them hunting. It's a little bit weird.
Yeah, it's a little weird. I don't know. It felt more like rediscovering a sister, though, than it did.
Well, one thing I
sexual.
kept... Yeah, rediscovering it. Yeah, I don't know if there was anything sexual about it. One thing I kept wondering when I was reading this, though, was the difference between what a man would think versus what a woman would think. And Willa Cather wrote this, obviously, a woman. And so maybe she thinks this is beautiful, but if a man... I don't know.
Maybe she doesn't realize that she should have dealt with the whole sex issue, because as men we're like,
yeah, and it's a little bit of romanticism going on at the end.
Well, this is a nice turnabout as fair play, because I'm always like embarrassed by men that like, really, Bram Stoker, you wrote Mina like, oh, the menfolk will see me crying, and now we can finally.
And there are just certain things that. What else struck me that way? Well, the grandfather's response to the suicide. He was supposed to be this Protestant, kind of hard-nosed Baptist
deacon.
And yet he was so sympathetic. And it reminded me a little bit of the wishy-washy effeminacy in Gilead with the pastor there. And I was just wondering if there wasn't something to the fact that this is a woman writing this story, that you get these sort of responses that are more relational.
With dealing with that one in particular, I just thought, yeah, that explains that's just Midwestern values. It's like you take these people with these principles, but then you you throw them together in this tough situation, and you put add a little bit of warmth and compassion, and then you just begin to start smoothing over the edges. And just so long as we can all get along with it, we just want to get along with each other. And
so that struck you as realistic.
To each his own, and sort of whitewash each other's, find the good in it. And that's how I read that, but I don't know. I don't want to like turn into the authority on the Midwest or something like that.
I hadn't thought of that. I mean, I've heard that about Midwestern people. It's a Texan thing to do too. Maybe the Texans and Midwesterns have something in common there. Just whitewash it over.
God hears the prayers of all good people.
Yeah.
There's another instance of that. It
felt to me as a betrayal, and I didn't know if it was coming because it was an actual betrayal from the granddad.
It felt inevitable to me.
Really? Jim sets his grandpa up that, like he says multiple times, oh crap, I hope grandpa, or I saw grandma look at grandpa and I knew she knew it was coming. So you sort of do get the idea that there's been situations where grandpa has not been willing, where he's said the religiously staunch, manly, to use Brandon's
he's dropped his principle,
where he's dropped his
down.
principle. Yeah, he is kind of. There's multiple times where you feel the tension of, is he going to do that? And then you never actually see him. I guess you do see him do it a little bit, but not really.
But then she is able to draw a character like that because what's his name? The family that she goes to live with, she leaves because he won't let her go to the dance.
Yeah.
She draws him fairly hard-nosed and accurate, but you don't see him much. And you could make the argument that the actual people that she draws the best are the men and the women who are like men. Because she's Lena and Tiny and Antonia, they all had to take
the women who are like men.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I'm sorry. Something about how you said that.
I'm trying to think, does she really have a soft woman, except maybe the grandmother?
Grandma, to some extent.
They're all tough.
Yeah, but she is tough.
Every woman that she actually draws is tough, right?
Yeah. He's not the bride that got thrown to the wolves. She was pretty...
Oh, yeah. Whew, man. That story stuck with me.
That's when I knew I loved the book, actually. It was, hey, something horrible. I'm going to enjoy this book.
Yeah, sorry. I can
It's not as easy as it looks.
I can do it.
You think
I can do it.
Where do we find these Twitters?
You can follow The Bookening on Twitter and Instagram at The Bookening. You can also follow Warhorn Media on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Warhorn Media. You can find Nathan on Twitter at NotFamousNathan. You can find me on Twitter at Jacob Minsel. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook, but just go ahead and look us up there if you want to. Brandon is not on social media. I think he's on Facebook. You may be able to friend Brandon on Facebook.
I'm on Instagram too.
Yeah, it's like...
Oh yeah, you're newly on Instagram. That's right.
He's got like 6 pictures.
Yeah.
B.S. Chastain?
B. Scott Chastain.
Oh, B. Scott Chastain.